Welcome to Better Than We Found It, the podcast dedicated to people who have a purpose-driven mission to leave a positive legacy through their leadership. Here, we bring you a diverse range of executive leaders and aspiring future leaders engaging in thoughtful conversation around harnessing sustainability to guide a responsible leadership, creating positive change, and ultimately driving value creation. I'm your host, Josh Huggins, and the founder of GS2 Partnership, a global talent solutions firm focusing on current and future leadership positions within sustainably conscious and positive impact organisations. We are on a critical journey to connect to the people who believe in leaving the world better than we found it. Welcome everybody to Better Than We Found It, the podcast dedicated to speaking with executives and finding about how they found their purpose in life and their business. I'm your host, Josh Huggins, the founder of GS2, a specialist talent solutions firm focusing on the sustainability, ESG, health and safety, and associated functions within organisations. I'm delighted today to be joined by Lena Patel of the RBIJ, or the Responsible Business Initiative for Justice. Lena, I'd love to hand over to you to do a quick introduction for those who aren't aware of the organisation or yourself.
Thanks, Josh. So yes, I'm Lena. I'm the Deputy CEO of the Responsible Business Initiative for Justice, or RBIJ, as Josh mentioned. And we are an international not-for-profit, and we work with the business community to use their voices, their platforms, their CEO activism to help create change in criminal justice reform. And so we work in collaboration with charities, not-for-profits, campaign organisations on the ground, and we kind of bring that business voice to those kind of efforts to lead change. And we do that in three fundamental ways. We try and create systemic change. So we work with businesses, as I mentioned earlier, CEO activism, CEO voices, their platforms, to try and see if we can create change in policy, in legislation, so we can make the system fairer. We also work on narrative change. A big piece of our work is trying to change the narrative around criminal justice reform and to show people, policymakers, decision makers that actually businesses care about this issue and it's important. So we do that through events, through media, through communications, through op-eds, and we bring business voices to those changes. And then we also work on implementation. So we work directly with businesses and we ask them to sort of review their hiring and recruitment practices, maybe look at how they invest, and are they making any direct or indirect unfair impact upon people with records or the prison system. So yeah, that's what we do when we try and create change and work in collaboration, mainly in the US, because that's where most of our funding comes from. But we do some international work, and we're also increasingly doing some work in the UK. Over the past 12 to 18 months, we've been exploring if our US efforts can also be applied to the UK as well.
Brilliant. Well, thanks for that very good and comprehensive introduction. I definitely wouldn't have been able to do justice. And we met at the Chatham House event last year, and that's where I heard you talking. And have to admit, before I heard about what it is that you do and the organisation, I perhaps would have assumed something like this existed, but it was great to actually hear from somebody within the organisation creating meaningful change. And I think from that moment and knowing I wanted to create a podcast, you're certainly on my target list of people to talk to. So I'm delighted that you're here. So I think to start with, what I want to do is perhaps go back to the beginning and understand, I suppose, how your own passions and interests within socially focused organisations came to be, because I can see that as a theme throughout your career that we can go through. So just take us back to the beginning of the story. Where did you grow up? Tell us a bit about your childhood and upbringing.
Absolutely. So I think I've always been sort of aware about inequality, about what equality means. And I think it comes from my parents. They've always instilled in my sister and myself sort of, to be kind, to be respectful, to treat people as you would want to be treated. And that probably was amplified a little bit because my parents are East African Asian. So my dad was born in Uganda. My mum was born in Kenya. And they got married in 1971 and then were expelled from Uganda with all the Asians in 1972 under Idi Amin's regime. And so my family, my parents, my uncles, my aunts fled Uganda, came to the UK, and had to rebuild their lives as people of colour, rebuild their home, start again. And I think their experiences has sort of, I guess, penetrated into the way my sister and I were brought up in terms of trying to make sure that you can treat people fairly and give everybody a chance. And so I guess that's kind of where my initial purpose came from, and this kind of feeling of wanting to do good in the world. And that kind of just stemmed through my entire life, through career choices I've made, through my dissertation at university. I went to the University of Sheffield and did a dissertation on the death penalty and the abolition of the death penalty. Don't know why I chose that subject. I think it was because I'd done a human rights module and just thought, why have we got the death penalty still in the world? Why do we still have it? And so explored that. And I think just has always been a part of my life in terms of wanting to create change and how I can make people around me feel that they're included.
Sure, and I suppose having that backdrop of your your family situation and the move would have been something that really played a big part in growing up. I suppose I look back at my family, my dad's side of the family from Trinidad and Tobago. They moved with the intent to come to the UK, but still, I suppose, faced quite a lot of racism and questions, I suppose, about why they were here when they were trying to create a life and an opportunity for the family. So I suppose there's probably some similarities there. What challenges did you and your family face growing up, and was that a theme that you experienced in your early years?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's interesting, and I don't know whether you feel the same, but you kind of, I don't know whether you block it out or it just becomes part of your everyday, that you just almost become used to it, which is not a good thing to say. But I grew up in a very sort of loving family home, very close family. Grew up in a very traditional Indian background, so lots of extended family. I was actually, when my parents left Uganda, they came to Hastings, where I was born, but I was only there for about 11 months of my life. And then all the family moved to Leicester for business opportunities. And so, I grew up in Leicester, which is, it's a big Indian community in Leicester, a big East African Asian community. And so grew up sort of very much, with my cousins, with my uncles, with my aunts. We all still live relatively near each other in Leicester. And Leicester, is this great way of celebrating different festivals from different backgrounds and cultures. So Diwali was celebrated in a big way in Leicester. And it was all very part of how we grew up. But then there was this other side where you're trying to integrate. And my schooling was in North Leicestershire, which was kind of very, very white. And so, fitting in with my friends who were white, and, our backgrounds were different. What we did in the evenings were different. And, there would be that everyday racism, calling you a name. And I think I was one of probably only 2 or 3 kids in my secondary school that was a person of colour.
Sure.
And I suppose, and now I think back now, I think, oh, maybe I was a little bit uncomfortable at school. Maybe at the time I didn't realize it. But I suppose that kind of thread has been there with me when I look back. And I remember my mum used to work for an organisation in Leicester called Leicestershire Racism Awareness Consortium, another long name.
Yeah.
And and they were this brilliant little outfit, only sort of 2 or 3 of them in the organisation. And they used to train local authorities on anti-racism training and policies. And I remember my sister and I, when we were little, we must have been, I don't know, 10, 11, 12, I don't know, maybe very early teens, going into her office during the summer holidays. And my mum would walk in, and the first thing she'd do is listen to the answering messages that were left on the phone. And I would say 60% of them were just racist messages, people just being racist about the organisation, racist about its leadership. And my mum just going delete, 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 delete on the phone. And I think that was the first time I really thought, oh my God, what is this? Why are people behaving this way? And that was kind of, I think, my first realization that, gosh, this kind of inequity and inequality really does exist. And that was probably something that also spurred me along to want to pursue the career that I did.
Sure. And I suppose having a mother who's within a social organization that's campaigning for change, that's probably talking about this a lot, and bringing that back to you would have sparked some interest. So through you spoke about school there, but progressing to university, you mentioned the masters in international and commercial law, I think it was,
Yes.
and the abolition of the death penalty being the dissertation. Where do you think the passion for that particular topic came from, and I suppose it's quite interesting to see how that's linked back now to what you do within the RBIJ. So yeah, tell me a bit about where that came
Yeah.
from.
I was thinking about this when I knew I was going to be doing this podcast, and um, I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, there was definitely a module during my masters on international human rights, and I remember being really drawn to that subject and really beginning to understand sort of the international complexity around human rights, and I think that led me, when I was kind of figuring out what to do around my dissertation, I wanted to pick something that I felt was really fundamentally wrong, and the death penalty just is wrong on so many levels. And so I spent my dissertation, or my year during my masters, my dissertation on the abolition of the death penalty, and really enjoyed the subject, really enjoyed learning about it, learning about the people that sort of are pro the death penalty, people that are anti, and just started to, I guess, put some theory behind why people kind of support these awful forms of punishment. As you can see, I did not change my mind. I did not think that the death penalty was ever good. So that was really interesting. And then, I mean, maybe I'm jumping ahead, but when I graduated, I think my second job after graduation was working for the Commission for Racial Equality. And now it's the Equality and Human Rights Commission, but back then it was the CRE. And that was my real first foray into, and being then, I guess, taking my awareness even further about sort of the institutional and systemic racism and inequality that exists not only in society, but also in many public institutions. And I was there for about, I think, 2.5, 3 years, and that really did instill in me the change that needed to be made in terms of creating more equity amongst not only society but also in the institutions that sort of serve all of us.
Sure. And I know that you then moved into the GLA, and then after that into it was a consultant, an independent consultancy, or you started to work as an independent consultant. Where did that then transition come from, and I suppose the path of the career that you were potentially looking to take at that point?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting because if you look at my CV, you might think that I have, I've got lots of experiences in lots of different sectors and places, but the thread has always been, how do you engage businesses in the purpose that I was trying to deliver and create change for in the organization that I was working for at the time? And so at the CRE, the Commission for Racial Equality, I worked in the private sector policy team. So how do we bring businesses, how do we get them to think about their own equality policies? When I moved to the GLA, it was in the private sector team. And how do we get businesses to be part of mayoral policy and practice? And then I took a career break because I had children, and I decided that I still needed to work, but also to juggle children. And so I set up my own consultancy. And one of the first people I worked for or organization I worked for, was the Institute of Community Cohesion, ICOCO. And they were set up, the organisation was set up by a chap called Professor Ted Cantle, who wrote the Cantle Review, which was a review post the riots that happened up north in Bradford all those years ago. I think it was in the early 2000s. And so I joined ICOCO, and that was, again, how can we bring businesses into the issue around cohesion? And that was really interesting because that was about, how can we create cohesion in those cities in the UK where there's this kind of division between different groups of people, and what will bring them together? What's the goal that will bring them together? What can create this cohesive society? And so that was one of my first projects or consultancy roles I did. And again, it really opened my eyes up to not only difference, but also the challenge of bringing people together and the misunderstanding around different groups of people, and why, and perhaps some of the barriers as to why people can't sometimes connect. And usually it's just to a misunderstanding, or not necessarily being educated about particular community groups.
Sure. I'm really interested in getting into the RBIJ, so I won't go through every role, but there was something quite interesting with me that we spoke about before this at Nesta, and around the crowdfunding and the alternative finance. Would you mind just explaining a bit about your corporate affairs manager role there and what that involved?
Yeah, Nesta is a super interesting organisation. Always ahead of the game in terms of social innovation for social good. And the foundation is really set up to think about ways that innovation can really make a change and really create change for social good. And when I was there, I was corporate affairs manager. It was, again, a new role, so bringing business voices to Nesta and our policies and campaigns. And worked very closely with the policy and research team who were sort of way ahead in terms of researching alternative ways for finance. What's crowdfunding? Almost like 3 or 4 years before it really became a thing. Similarly, in terms of health, there was so much health innovation happening at Nesta at the time when I was there. And one of the things I think I'm really proud of was I was part of a team and we delivered this festival called Future Fest, which was bringing together speakers and thought leaders into one space and just the general public, and to really challenge like the future and how we can create innovation for good, and what that means. So yeah, it's a really interesting organisation, and I think continues to do really great work.
Wonderful. So you mentioned in your intro to RBIJ that it's a predominantly US, or the work that you do is in the US. So how did the move materialize with your background being based in the UK? Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so I saw the job advertised in the Guardian, as most people do,
Yeah.
and it was really interesting. And it's what you said earlier. It was about, it suddenly felt, it made sense because it's bringing my passion, my dissertation all those years ago on the death penalty, and business engagement that I had been doing for the last sort of 20 years or so into sort of one job, which was perfect. And it was really interesting. And what drew me to the role was Celia Willett is the founder. She's a Brit. Well, she's a dual national, actually. She's a Brit and a US citizen. And she spent most of her career in the US as a death penalty lawyer for about 15 years. And through her work, realised that actually businesses, trade missions have a really important role to play in justice reform. And so she secured funding to set up RBIJ. She started it in 2017. And I joined in 2019. And I think I was one of one, I was the first one in or the second one in of a very small team. And what was really exciting is we got to really shape what RBIJ is about, which is, this organization that just doesn't work on the death penalty, although that was kind of the heart of what we did because that was Celia's background, but actually, how can businesses really be a voice for change in criminal justice reform? And so we got to really work together and strategize and really think about RBIJ, and I've really watched it grow over the last 3-4 years in terms of what we do and the impact we're making. So yeah, that's how I joined, and it's an exciting organization, ever changing still now.
Sure, absolutely. And I suppose, looking at the industry and the focus from an ESG perspective has predominantly been over the past 3 or 4 years on the environmental side, and reducing carbon, net zero. Those buzzwords have been coming more mainstream from an organizational perspective. But it's really important for organizations that we talk to on a regular basis to understand their social purpose. And I think especially from not just it being the right thing to do, but also in terms of talent attraction, in terms of the type of employees that people want to bring into the organization, that social's becoming something that more and more individuals are opening up to and starting to really think about and consider. So it's interesting, I suppose, the timing of the move, because I suppose probably back then, in comparison to now, the agenda in terms of in the mainstream was far less. But I'll be interested to see how that's progressed in those 4 years, because I would assume that the demand for what you do and the interest from business has grown aligned with the impact across the whole of ESG.
Yeah, I think so. I think you're right. I don't know. It's interesting. Our current CEO, Maha Jawed, is another incredible woman who leads RBIJ, and Celia remains our founder. And she's interesting. It's interesting what she says, because she was saying to me that maybe 10 or 12 years ago, could RBIJ have existed? Would businesses have been really interested in this space? And I think she's right. I'm not sure that they necessarily would have been, or at least to the level that we're working with them right now. But I think it's increasingly become apparent that people with records or criminal justice is so integrated and connected to poverty, to diversity, equity, and inclusion, to mental health, to so many issues that you can't not keep them together and keep them entwined. Josh, if I share some statistics with you, which maybe some of, I don't know, people listening may not know, but 1 in 3 Americans has a criminal record. That's a third of the population. 1 in 3 Black men born in the US can expect to spend some time in prison. That's more than have a college degree. It's crazy, the statistics. Over 12 million people in the UK have a criminal record. So 1 in 3 men of a working age has a criminal record, and that's 1 in 6 people in England and Wales. And in Scotland, England, and Wales, we have the highest incarceration rates than the whole of Western Europe. So, I think the figures speak for themselves. And the justice system, you can't see the justice system in just this box of, well, you've committed a crime, you go to prison, that's what it is. There are so many connected issues that are just, I wish we had more understanding of them, and then perhaps we could then tackle the system as it is. There's the Prison Reform Trust produced these things called the Bromley briefings, and I'm just going to throw a few stats at you, and I don't think many people will necessarily know this, but 24%, and this is in the UK, 24% of the prison population have been taken into care versus 2% of the general population. 70% have a mental health issue versus 25% of the general population. And 64% have used Class A drugs versus 13% of the general population. So already you can see that if we tackled things like mental health, if we tackled things like, the care system, if we tackled things like drug use, those people would not be entering the prison system. And why do we incarcerate them? So, I think to come back to a question about ESG, I think it's complex, and it's not an easy issue to untangle, although countries like Norway are managing to do it pretty successfully. But if we can get to the root of some of these issues, and we can then stop that, that pipeline to prison, I think we'd see a real change, and then we would really see a reduction in crime levels, which we're just not seeing.
Sure. And I think the thing that really stood out to me when I started to hear about the RBIJ from you at the event, and then the research I did afterwards, is it sort of mimics the elements that I see of how the proactive organizations are driving the E in ESG, the E in ESG agenda. We're sort of, some organizations, I suppose, are waiting for government legislation and policy to change in order to be forced to comply with regulation. But where we see the biggest impact, both from the ESG, if you just take it from an ESG perspective or ratings perspective, but also there's a huge untapped, I suppose, commercial gain that can be had with these things that I think sometimes aren't spoken about enough. And it's pushed that it's the right thing to do, but actually there's a value creation piece that can actually be extremely beneficial to a business and have, of course, the supplementary benefits. So I'm keen to really understand more around, the business's impact and how perhaps some of the success stories that some businesses have really played their part in, but also using business as the voice rather than your organization, I suppose, lobbying governments, but you're using the businesses, your profitable businesses, to actually deliver some of these achievements, which I think is a really good way to drive that positive change. So could you tell us a bit about why do you focus on businesses, and then also what perhaps some of the success stories have been?
Yeah, I mean, we focus on businesses because we won't beat around the bush. Businesses are powerful people in our society. They hold sway. If a business says something, usually a policymaker, a decision maker will listen. And so we want to capture that. We want to capture that power. So that's why our kind of angle is business engagement. And we don't do this in isolation, by the way. We always work in collaboration. So we'll never lead a campaign. There are people, incredible organizations working on the ground day to day that are doing great work, whether it's around criminal record clearing, whether it's around the death penalty, whether it's locking up children for the rest of their lives, which is what the US does. And we bring the business voice to those campaign efforts when we feel it might make a difference. And a good example of this is some work we've done in the US. And actually, we're beginning to start doing sort of similar work in the UK, which I can touch upon. And I think it's a thing that I spoke about at Chatham House. But in the US, if you have a criminal record, it's not necessarily automatically cleared when you've sort of spent your time and you've completed your time served. So expunging a record in the US for somebody is a real costly affair because it falls upon the person with the record to clear it. And there's some stat, I think like 95% of people who are eligible to have expungement don't do it because they have to find a lawyer and it's costly and they don't know how and what the process is. So they just keep it. And then having that record means that they can't get a job or they can't get housing or they can't travel. And I think I mentioned earlier, 1 in 3 Americans has a criminal record. That's about 70 million American adults have some sort of criminal or arrest record. And so
sorry, Lena, but just to cut in there, because I think it's a really important point. So these individuals would have the conviction is now spent, but purely from a administration perspective, and the red tape that they would have to go through, they're not able to actually show
That's right.
that.
Yeah.
Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. They just don't clear it because the onus in the US is upon the person who has the record to clear it. In the UK, we do have automation of records. We just have a DBS system that's a bit backward, which I can talk about later. So the US system is slightly different.
Mm.
And so we work with this incredible organization called the Clean Slate Initiative. And the Clean Slate Initiative is basically there to try and create clean slate legislation across all the states in the US. And so that when you have a record, it's automatically wiped and automatically. And then somebody can get on and live their lives. And I think 12 states, have now passed clean slate legislation in the US. We've worked in collaboration with Clean Slate Initiative on a couple of those states, and one of them was Colorado, which is a really big success story because in Colorado, we managed to get 30 or so businesses to join our campaign efforts to try and pass clean slate legislation. And it was really for them, it's from a workforce perspective issue. Like they wanted to recruit people. And so actually, if we could clear their records, people might be more willing to apply for jobs. And that legislation passed. And now 1.3 Coloradans have had their records wiped and now can access employment. So, business voices really mattered in that case because they were really giving the argument from a workforce and economic argument, and not necessarily from a criminal justice reform argument or point of view.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I understand the power of business absolutely is there, but I would also assume that perhaps with some businesses there may be pushback that you receive when you engage with them as to why they should do this, or perhaps an undereducation of what the benefits could be. So for those listening that might be interested in looking at some of their social elements and getting involved in some of these campaigns, what would you say? What do you say? We've spoken about recruitment, perhaps at scale, but what would be some of the benefits to businesses in really getting behind this, and what do you see the benefits have been to those who have already worked in collaboration with you?
Yeah, I think the arguments are for a business are quite for me anyway, I think they're quite straightforward. You're accessing a whole untapped talent pool of people who have the skills, have the experience, have the knowledge, but can't apply for a job because they have a record, or are reluctant to because they're scared their record might show. Most people in the UK who have a criminal record haven't served a prison sentence. They've got a record because they've committed a minor offence or have done something wrong. That should not affect how they live the rest of their lives. And so for a business, I think they should look at it from accessing a new pool of talent. I think you have to look at it from a diversity and inclusion point of view. It's a fact that people with records disproportionately affect people of colour. So there is a race element to it. But also, I think, somebody told me once recently that it feels like people who've been impacted by the justice system, it's okay that we can discriminate against those people because they've committed a crime, they've done something wrong. It's okay to discriminate. But actually, no, it's not okay to discriminate against those people. And they should be part of the overall discussion around inclusivity in terms of, economic activity. If you look at the UK, we look at the economic inactivity rates that we keep hearing about in the news. How many of those people have a record? How many of those can't access the workforce? We don't know those statistics, they're not available. So I think, there are so many arguments about why businesses should engage, not only from a moral point of view, but from sort of an economic point of view too. And I'll just tell you before I forget, the Fair Checks movement in the UK is doing that. We're trying to change legislation. We're trying to get into the manifestos of the main political parties that we need to review our DBS system currently in the UK because it's really out of date. You can commit a crime when you're 12 or 13 years old and it will remain on your record for life, which then stops people getting a job. You can serve a short prison sentence of only a week and that will remain on your record for life. And most of these are for minor crimes. So we've got to give people a chance. Everyone deserves a second chance, and there are reasons why people commit crime. They don't just commit a crime. So I think if we get to the bottom of it and behind those reasons and then help people get work by making the system fairer, I think everyone benefits.
Sure. So onto fair checks, because it was one of the stories I wanted to talk about today. Could you tell us a bit about what RBIJ are doing, who you're working in collaboration with, where are you on the journey right now, and what does the future
Yeah.
for that look like?
Yeah, so Fair Checks is an incredible campaign run by two charities that we work really closely with, Transform Justice and Unlock. And the idea and what we're calling for is a review of the DBS system in England and Wales. As you know, Scotland and Northern Ireland have a separate system. And so, what we're asking for is three fundamental changes. One, that there's no automatic disclosure of cautions, that you can wipe the slate clean for childhood offences, not serious offences, but childhood offences, and stop forcing people to reveal short prison sentences forever. And so what the campaign has been doing is a very sort of public campaign, so trying to get people in their constituencies rather, to write to their MP and sort of say that this issue matters to them. And then what we've been doing for the last, I would say, 18 months, 12 months or so, is trying to bring the business voice to those campaign efforts. So we've started a business statement letter, trying to get businesses to support change in the DBS system, and also, I guess, a little bit of educating around the fact that the system is really not fit for purpose. And just to give you a really quick example, and sometimes I hear these examples and it still shocks me, but you can be 21 years old, Josh, you're hanging around with your sister and she gets verbally abused by a neighbour. You intervene, you might shove the man away, he falls, he grazes his hand, you plead guilty, you pay a fine of £80, you get a charge of ABH. That record will stay on with you for the rest of your life. It just doesn't make sense, and that can block you from certain types of employment. So changes need to be made. We're working really closely with the Fair Checks campaign, and our aim really is to try and get the main political parties, Labour, Conservative, Lib Dems, to really think about adding this into their manifestos ahead of the next election, because it does require legislative change, and so that's what we'd like to see.
Sure. And what's the feedback been like, and how are you on that journey?
I think we're still working our way through it. It's not easy, and you're having to sort of combat a little bit of the tough on crime narrative. And it's really important to know that this isn't about not being tough on crime. That's a different issue. This is about creating a system that's fit for purpose. And so we have had conversations. I know the Fair Checks team are talking to sort of people from all walks of the various political parties. We're sort of working with businesses to try and raise the profile of it. We're trying to sort of take our lessons from clean slate legislation, which is, I guess, the most equivalent in the US, and bring that to the UK and see if we can share some of the learnings in terms of the stats around unlocking opportunities for people with records into the UK. So, we're kind of still making our way. It's not easy, it's tough. There's lots of things on the political agenda that are being dealt with, and this is just, one of them. I think crime is always a difficult one for political parties to tackle. But I think if you can just sort of begin to educate and make people understand what we're trying to do, we're not saying that there shouldn't be any prisons. What we're saying is let's create a fairer system, because at the moment it's really not fit for purpose and not fair.
Sure, absolutely. So your role has recently changed. I understand you've had a promotion to Deputy CEO, prior to that being the Chief External Affairs Officer. Would you mind just explaining a bit about what the role and remit in the External Affairs role was, and in your new role, the remit and responsibility, and how that's potentially changing and evolving?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still doing external affairs work because that's kind of, that's the stuff I love.
Sure.
So I guess in my previous role as Chief External Affairs Officer, and still in this role as Deputy CEO, I'm still trying to work and bring businesses into RBIJ's portfolio of businesses that we engage and work with. So I still do that kind of proactively. But I guess wider than that, my role is more about sort of supporting the CEO, representing the CEO and RBIJ at various events and things like this. I do lead on our international business relationships. I work very closely with the CEO and the senior leadership team on strategy and oversight. But also, I still like to get involved in the project. So I lead and work in partnership with the team on our death penalty campaign, which is, as I mentioned right at the beginning, kind of a bit of the beating heart of our work. And every year, well, I say every year, this is our second year. We should have had more by now, but COVID kind of intervened. But we're
Yes.
into the second year of our American Workforce and Justice Summit. So that's a really big summit that last year we ran in Atlanta. This year we're holding in October in New York. And it's an opportunity to bring everyone we've been working with, businesses, together under one roof and talk about how businesses can really create change in justice reform, whether that's through advocacy, whether that's through changing their hiring practices, whatever that might be. So I kind of project manage that on behalf of RBIJ.
Excellent. And I know that you mentioned to me that there have been some fairly big names in business that are getting involved in some of the work that you're doing and the projects that you are. Would you mind telling the audience a bit about who they are and perhaps the involvement they've had?
Yeah. So our Business Leaders Against the Death Penalty campaign is spearheaded by Sir Richard Branson of Virgin. He's been a real advocate for abolition for many, many years. And I think it must have been about 2 or 3 years ago. We kind of worked with Virgin and their team to sort of establish the Business Leaders Against the Death Penalty campaign, which is this declaration asking businesses from across the world to sign a declaration calling for the global abolition of the death penalty. He led that. Has launched it, and to date we have about 250 business leaders who've joined that campaign, and we kind of activate that campaign when we see legislation may be changing, primarily in the US, but we've done a little bit of work in Singapore as well. So that's a really, really amazing project. And we've got some incredible, business leaders that have joined that campaign from, Ben and Jerry's, Ben Cohen and Jerry Greenfield. We've got Alan Jope, Paul Pullman, Ariana Huffington. We've got some really great names, Sheryl Sandberg, some really great names who've supported that campaign. So that continues to go and grow. And then we also work in partnership with Walmart. Walmart funded an incredible project called Unlock Potential, which is, again, a US focused project, which is about getting young people aged 16 to 24 who are more likely to enter the prison population, sort of divert them into a career rather than, enter the prison system, which is what they're maybe more likely to do because of the backgrounds they come from. And so we're working closely with Walmart and a bunch of businesses, Delta, again, Ben and Jerry is a part of that. A number of businesses, Hilton Hotels, Virgin, who are supporting our efforts in terms of looking at their own hiring practices and offering career opportunities for people from that cohort to have a job and a career. So that's really exciting, and we work with them. And in the UK, we have some great relationships. We work quite closely with Iceland. As you know, they have a new director of rehabilitation, Paul Cowley, who's doing some incredible work in this space. So there's a bunch of businesses, large and small, who are joining our efforts, and it's exciting. It's growing.
Excellent. Yes, for sure. And our audience base are from individuals within SME organisations, not for profits that are focusing on impact, through to large corporates and everywhere in between. If there's business leaders listening who are interested in the RBIJ and would like to get involved, how do businesses and leaders get involved, and what can they do?
Yeah, I mean, if they're interested, please just drop me an email, lena@rbij.org. I'm very happy to take anyone's email. I think that the lovely thing about RBIJ is that we will work where you are comfortable as a business. There are some businesses that we work with who are just beginning to start their journey in this space and are maybe not quite happy to be quite so vocal, but just want to learn a bit. And that is totally fine. That is actually really great. And we're happy to work with you on that, in that space. And then there are other businesses like the Virgins, like the Ben and Jerry's, like Sir Richard Branson, who are doing incredible work and who want to be really vocal and support our efforts. And we'll work with them too. So we're really happy to work with businesses wherever they feel comfortable in working with us. And I think just for businesses to really think about their own power and their own practices and policies. Sometimes we get a business that says, we really like what you're doing, we're really supportive, but our own house isn't quite in order. So we don't really want to be vocal about it. And our response to that is, it's okay if your own house isn't in order. It does take time to maybe change your recruitment practices. Maybe it might take time to look at your supply chain. But if you can say and be transparent that, we're still work in progress, but we support whatever policy change we're trying to make, that is really powerful in itself and really beneficial. And so, I don't think a business has to worry that everything has to be perfect before they can be advocates in this space. I think there's a line that can be drawn. And I think as long as you're honest about where you are, that's okay.
Sure. And what about So, a lot of the things we've spoken about today have been on the positive side of the interaction you have with businesses, but I'm sure that there will be times where actually there is negative pushback that you receive, or that you go to places and it's perhaps not so welcome. How do you deal with that as an organisation, and position yourselves in a way to try to get the maximum uptake in what it is that you're trying to do?
Yeah. Yeah, we do. And it's not easy. I mean, I know maybe the conversation feels like it's been, been an easy process, but it's not. It's really difficult. I think it's difficult in a number of ways. One, I think because criminal justice still has that element of, I don't want to say fear, but there's, it's not an issue that everybody's necessarily hugely comfortable with. That's one thing. I think also we're competing against lots of big issues in the world that that are rightly should be tackled, climate change and various other issues. So I think getting our space and being able to sort of say, well, this issue matters, is also a challenge. But what we normally do is, we're really happy to back off. If a business says, no, I'm not interested right now, that is totally fine. There's no pressure, there's no persuasion. We're not a consultancy. We're just here to find a way to activate your voice. And we will do that by taking the resource away from you, by presenting a business with a suite of opportunities that you can get involved in. And if you want to do them, you can. If you don't, that is totally fine, no pressure. But also the education piece. I always say to people, like, I get it if you don't understand the issue, but let me just share a little bit with you about why this issue is important. And did you know kind of stuff which we talked about earlier? Did you know the number of people that have a record? Did you know the number of people that have a mental health issue, end up in prison? So if you just sort of create a bit of education and explain to people the perspective you're coming from, can sometimes alleviate that. But at the end of the day, if somebody doesn't want to get involved, or if somebody is pushing back, then that is also totally fine. I always hope that I always think when I talk to somebody that even if they say no, well, at least RBIJ is now on their radar. Whether they remember us as a thing, at least they now know we are and we exist. And you never know, 5 or 10 years down the line, they may come back to us.
Sure. And I think that's what leadership's all about, isn't it? It's about taking people to places perhaps that they didn't recognize or understand that they had an affinity to, perhaps. And it may not be immediately that they connect with that, and it may be that they don't ever go there. But if you can unlock the question that's in somebody's mind that they haven't actually asked before, to enable them to start to explore this, and really then perhaps that can evolve to the point of a Sir Richard Branson really spearheading and leading, then that's where you're leading the conversation and leading the agenda. And I suppose that's one of the things that I was really attracted to when I heard you talk, that not many people are talking about this. And I think that it's great that an organization is really shining the light on this. So from a leadership perspective, then, I'm keen to just hear, given that we work within the talent space, who has been a leader within your career? Because you've had a path that's gone across a few different areas, but with that social purpose really at its core. Who have been a leader or two that you've really admired within your career, and what is it about that that's really stood out to you and helped you on your journey?
Yeah, it's interesting. That's such a difficult question, because there's so many people that you think, gosh, I wish I could be like that, or that's really
Yeah.
inspired me. Not to sound too cliche, but I think watching my mum has worked her entire life, and I think watching my mum work and navigate life and navigate work and children and a career was pretty inspirational, and I think embedded in myself and my sister, that to have a career, you can do it. It's hard and it's difficult, but you can do it, and it's important. I think when I was working at the Greater London Authority, my director there was a chap called John Ross, and he kind of, I think, probably gave me my first chance. I didn't quite, I don't think, perform as well as I probably should have done in the interview, but I think he saw something in me and he gave me an opportunity. And I think that I was there for about 5 years, and I think that job and that sort of exposure and learning so much in that role really sort of pushed me and elevated me to have other opportunities in my future career. So I kind of probably owe him a thanks to say thank you for giving the opportunity. I think a good leader can see something in someone that even if they don't perform well, or they've had a bad day, but there is something there, I think, that they can identify with. I think that's always an important skill to have. So he's been an important person, I think. yeah, and I think there's probably like sort of other people in my career that I've kind of looked up to, and I putting me on the spot and I can't remember them. I do think, and this is not to sound really not to sound cheesy, but I think when I met Celia and heard her experience, and I don't think I'd ever directly met a death penalty lawyer in the sort of face to face before. You read
Sure.
about people that work on these cases. That was pretty inspirational to hear what she'd done and sort of what she'd been through, and her experiences were pretty incredible. And I don't think I'll ever fully really appreciate what she did over those 15 years to create RBIJ and what it is right now. Um, and our current CEO Maha, to be led by really strong women. She's also an incredibly strong leader, and has worked in the Obama administration and comes from a different background. Is really amazing to learn from people that have had some quite different experiences to your own in terms of a career and what you can pick out. So I think there's been like a bunch of people that have probably inspired me along the way. Yeah, that's a difficult question, Josh.
Sure. Well, sorry about putting you on the spot, but I think it's interesting to hear how people use the individuals they interact with in their career to help themselves. And I suppose at the core of what we want to discuss on this podcast is it's around engaging with people who really do have that passion and that belief to leave the world better than they found it. So, from your own aspirations and your own goals and objectives, by the end of your career, what would you like your legacy to be, to show or to know that you've left the world better than you found it?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this. It is a really difficult question, and it's really hard not to sound like cheesy. But I really hope that the work that I've done and that I am doing, and I think throughout my career, I've had some really incredible jobs, and I really love them. But I think this job at RBIJ really has kind of caught me in a different way. I think I really hope that I've made a change in a small way to the justice system, and maybe made the life better for somebody that's perhaps less fortunate than me, or has had just a trickier life than me just by circumstance. So I really hope my legacy is that people will remember that I kind of just was part of a bigger push to create a better place for people that have been impacted by the justice system. That would be really important to me. And I also think that I've got two kids. I try and they see my work, they hear me talk about my work, and I hope that they continue to sort of be kind individuals, be respectful individuals, and hope that they will also feel that they can also make a change to leave the world that they live in better too. So yeah, I think I don't think I'm going to change the world in a big massive way, but I think my small contribution will hopefully make a difference to some people.
Sure. And we're recruiting in this space and talking to people who are purpose driven every single day. We see some people with huge ambitions and others with slightly more smaller but very precise ways in which they want to change things. For us, I think if everybody's moving in the right direction with kindness, with humility, with a care for others, then we will do that. And I think that business, as you say, and as the organisation holds true, can be a real powerful voice for that change because of the power it has. But it takes the individual or the individuals within those businesses to actually deliver those. And I think sometimes we can get a bit lost in that we all do have a part to play. And if we believe in something, we really should push it through, like you have demonstrated within your career. So it's been wonderful to hear about your experiences today. Thank you so much. You've already plugged your email address, so I'm sure people are very keen to connect with you if they are. But are you happy for people to also connect with you perhaps on LinkedIn or engage in any other ways?
Yeah, however they want to contact me, feel free to do so. I'm really happy to take calls and to bring people on board.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Well, perhaps we can sit down in the not too distant future and hear about how some of these other areas have progressed, especially the fair checks. It sounds like that's something you're putting a lot of effort and time into. But thank you so much for talking to me today. It's been a very enlightening discussion from my perspective, and I've certainly learned a lot, which has been great. And I hope that everybody listening has as well. So thank you very much, and look forward to catching up with you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Better Than We Found It. I hope you have found value from this to support your own purpose-led journey. This episode was brought to you by GS2 Partnership, my organisation focused on providing talent solutions for sustainably focused organisations. We are driven by our purpose of connecting the people who believe in leaving the world better than we found it. If you are looking for a partner to support you with your hiring plans, or you are looking for your own career next steps, please reach out to us or personally drop me a message on LinkedIn. It's great to hear from listeners to the podcast, and I would welcome the opportunity to talk to you. Thank you very much, and stay tuned for our next episode.